What happens when a fan-favorite Hollywood star walks onto a daytime talk show and the conversation takes a turn no one saw coming? Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The camera opens on the familiar set of The View. The audience is already energized, clapping as the hosts sit around the table. Whoopi Goldberg leans slightly forward, adjusting her glasses with that calm, seasoned presence she always carries. Joy Behar glances toward her notes, while Sunny and Alyssa exchange a quick smile, anticipating the next segment. Whoopi looks into the camera, her tone warm but measured. All right, we're back. Our next guest is someone you all know and love. He's been everywhere lately, from big screen hits to critically acclaimed TV roles. Please welcome Pedro Pascal. The audience erupts into applause, louder than usual. Pedro walks out with a relaxed smile, waving slightly, clearly appreciative, but a bit humble about the attention. He hugs each of the hosts, lingering a second longer with Whoopi, exchanging a quick, friendly comment that doesn't quite make it to the mic. Pedro sits down, adjusting in his chair. Wow, this is a full house today, he says, glancing at the audience. Joy jumps in immediately. They're here for you, Pedro. Don't let Whoopi fool you. Whoopi smirks. Excuse me, some of them are here for me. The audience laughs. Pedro raises his hands playfully. I'm not getting in the middle of that. There's a light, easy energy at first. Sunny leans in. You've had an incredible run lately. Everywhere we look, it's Pedro Pascal. How does that feel? Pedro exhales softly, nodding. It feels surreal, honestly. I've been doing this for a long time, and suddenly it feels like everything hit at once. I'm grateful, but I try not to get too caught up in it. Whoopi watches him closely, nodding, but not smiling as broadly as the others. There's a subtle shift in her posture, slightly more attentive, slightly more analytical. Alyssa adds, but with that level of visibility also comes pressure, right? Especially when you speak out on issues. Pedro tilts his head slightly. Yeah, I think if you have a platform, it's hard to ignore what's going on around you. Joy jumps in. You've been pretty vocal lately. Some people love it, some people, she shrugs. Not so much. Pedro smiles faintly. That usually means you're saying something that matters. The audience gives a mix of applause and a few scattered murmurs. Whoopi finally leans forward, resting her hands on the table. Her tone is still calm, but there's a noticeable shift. But here's the thing. Not everybody agrees that celebrities should be the ones saying it. There's a slight pause. Pedro looks at her, attentive. Whoopi continues. People are tuning in for entertainment. Sometimes they don't want to feel like they're being talked at. The audience quiets just a bit. Pedro nods slowly, considering his response. I get that, he says carefully. But I don't think it's about talking at people. It's about sharing perspective. We're all living in the same world. Whoopi tilts her head. Yeah, but not everyone asked for your perspective. There's a ripple in the audience, some laughter, some ooh reactions. Pedro lets out a small breath, still composed. That's fair. But I also didn't ask for a platform. It came with the work. And I think ignoring things feels worse. Sunny nods in agreement. There's a responsibility there. Whoopi raises a hand slightly. Responsibility to who, though? Now the tension becomes more noticeable. The energy at the table tightens, just slightly. Pedro shifts in his seat, his tone still calm but more deliberate. To people who don't have the same platform, he says. To conversations that need attention. Whoopi doesn't immediately respond. She watches him for a second, then leans back. But what if, she says slowly, people feel like they're being told what to think? Pedro shakes his head gently. I'm not telling anyone what to think. I'm just saying what I think. Joy jumps in, sensing the shift. But Pedro, you gotta admit, sometimes it doesn't come off that way. Sometimes it feels heavy. Pedro looks at her. The world is heavy. There's a brief silence. The audience reacts with a mix of applause and uncertainty. Whoopi's expression tightens just slightly. Not angry, just more serious now. Yeah, she says, but people come here to breathe for an hour. Pedro nods again, slower this time. And I respect that. I really do. But I also think we can breathe and still be aware. Alyssa looks between them, sensing the growing tension. I think what he's saying is. Whoopi cuts in, not aggressively, but firmly. No, I hear what he's saying. I just don't know if I agree with how it's being done. The audience reacts again, this time louder. A clear split. Pedro leans forward slightly now, mirroring Whoopi's posture from earlier. His tone remains controlled, but there's a hint of firmness creeping in. Can I ask something? He says. Whoopi nods. Of course. If you had this kind of reach when you were starting out, would you have stayed quiet? That question lands. You can feel it. The audience goes still, waiting. Whoopi doesn't answer immediately. She looks at him, then glances briefly at the audience, then back at the table. Well, she says slowly, that depends on what you're saying and how you're saying it. Pedro nods. That's fair. But there's something in his expression now, something more resolved. The lightness from the beginning of the segment is gone. The conversation has shifted into something deeper, more layered, and just slightly uncomfortable. Sunny leans in, trying to ease things. I think this is actually an important conversation to have. Whoopi raises her hand again, gently. It is. But it's also one we need to be careful with. Pedro looks at her. Careful or honest? Another pause. The audience reacts again, this time louder, more divided. Whoopi's eyes narrow just slightly, not in anger, but in focus. Those two things aren't always separate. Pedro gives a small nod, but doesn't look away. Sometimes they are. Joy exhales, half laughing, half tense. Okay, now we're getting into it. The audience laughs nervously. Whoopi leans forward again, her voice still calm, but with more weight now. No, we're not getting into it. We're just talking. Pedro responds quietly, yeah. We are. But the tone says otherwise. You can feel it now, the shift from a friendly interview to something more real, more unpredictable. And the audience knows it too. The applause fades, but the energy doesn't. You can feel it sitting in the room, something slightly heavier now, like the conversation has shifted from casual to something more personal. Pedro Pascal is still leaning forward just a bit, his hands now resting closer together on the table. Across from him, Whoopi Goldberg watches him carefully, her expression calm but clearly engaged in a deeper way. Joy Behar breaks the silence first. Okay, I think we just hit that moment where everyone at home sits up a little straighter. The audience laughs lightly, but it's nervous laughter, aware of the tension. Pedro smiles faintly. Yeah, I felt that too. Whoopi doesn't smile this time. She tilts her head slightly. Good. That means people are paying attention. Sunny leans in, trying to guide things forward. I want to go back to something you said, Pedro, about not staying silent. Because I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially when they know they'll be criticized no matter what. Pedro nods. Yeah, I mean, you're going to be criticized either way. If you speak, people will say you shouldn't. If you don't, people will ask why you didn't. Whoopi responds almost immediately. But that doesn't mean both choices carry the same weight. The audience reacts with a few claps. Pedro turns slightly toward her. No, they don't. But both are still choices. Whoopi leans forward again, her tone still measured but firmer than before. Right, but one of those choices puts your voice into spaces where it can influence people who may not have all the context. Pedro nods slowly. That's true. There's a brief pause, and for a second, it looks like he might leave it there. But he doesn't. But I think that's why it matters even more to be thoughtful about what you say, not to avoid saying anything at all. A mix of applause and murmurs moves through the audience. Joy glances between them. See, this is where it gets tricky. Because thoughtful means different things to different people. Alyssa nods. Exactly. One person's thoughtful is another person's out of touch. Pedro gives a small smile. That's fair. Whoopi watches him closely. So how do you decide? Who tells you? Okay, this is something I should speak on. Pedro pauses again. You can see he's taking the question seriously. No one tells me, he says. That's kind of the point. It's instinct, I guess. And listening. Trying to understand before speaking. Whoopi raises an eyebrow slightly. Trying. Pedro catches that immediately. Yeah, trying. I don't think anyone gets it right all the time. The audience reacts with a few approving claps. Whoopi nods once. At least you said that. There's a subtle edge to her tone, not hostile but pointed. Pedro leans back slightly now, his posture shifting from forward engagement to something more grounded. I don't think anyone at this table would say they get it right all the time either. That line gets a louder reaction, some applause, some surprised murmurs. Joy lets out a quick, okay, under her breath, half laughing. Whoopi doesn't laugh. She looks at Pedro steadily. No, we wouldn't. But the difference is, this table is built for that conversation. Pedro tilts his head. And my platform isn't? Whoopi answers without hesitation. Not in the same way. A quiet moves through the audience. Sunny steps in quickly. I think what Whoopi's saying is, this show is designed for debate. People expect it here. Pedro nods. I understand that. Then he looks back at Whoopi. But does that mean conversations shouldn't happen anywhere else? Whoopi leans back, folding her arms loosely. No, it means context matters. Pedro repeats softly, context matters. There's a pause. Then he adds, I agree with that. But context also changes. What used to be just entertainment isn't anymore. The audience reacts, this time more clearly divided. Alyssa leans in. That's actually a really important point. Social media, interviews, everything blends together now. Joy nods. Yeah, there's no clear line anymore. Whoopi exhales slowly. Maybe that's part of the problem. Pedro looks at her. Or part of the reality. That line lands harder than expected. The audience gives a louder reaction, some applause, some audible disagreement. Whoopi's expression tightens slightly. Not anger, but focus again. Reality doesn't mean we don't question how we use it. Pedro nods. I'm not saying we shouldn't question it. I'm saying we can't ignore it. There's a brief silence. Sunny looks between them, then addresses the table. I think this is where people at home are probably split. Some are saying, yes, speak up, and others are saying, stick to what you're known for. Joy adds, and some are just saying, I just wanted to watch a fun interview. That gets a bigger laugh, easing the tension for a moment. Pedro smiles, nodding. And I get that. I really do. He glances toward the audience briefly. I don't wake up thinking, how can I make people uncomfortable today? A few laughs come from the crowd. But sometimes, he continues, comfort isn't the goal. That line shifts the energy again. Less laughter now, more attention. Whoopi leans forward slightly. And that's exactly where people start to push back. Pedro meets her gaze. Why? Whoopi answers calmly. Because not everyone signed up for that. Pedro responds just as calmly. But they're still part of the world where it exists. A noticeable reaction moves through the audience, stronger this time. Joy raises her hands slightly. Okay, now we're really in it. Sunny smiles, but it's a tight smile. This is a real conversation. Whoopi doesn't break eye contact with Pedro. Let me ask you something else. Pedro nods. Sure. Do you ever think about the people who feel shut out by those conversations? Who feel like they're being judged or talked down to? Pedro's expression shifts slightly, more serious now. Yeah, he says. I do. There's a pause. And I don't want that, he adds. That's not the intention. Whoopi responds quickly. But it can still be the result. Pedro nods again. That's fair. For a moment, it feels like the tension might ease. But then he continues. But I also think avoiding those conversations doesn't make that feeling go away either. The audience reacts again, this time louder, more mixed. Whoopi leans back, exhaling through her nose slightly. So what's the solution then? Pedro gives a small, almost resigned smile. I don't think there's a perfect one. Joy laughs softly. Well, that's comforting. The audience laughs with her. Pedro shrugs lightly. I think it's just trying. Talking. Listening. Even when it's uncomfortable. Whoopi looks at him for a long second. Even when it's uncomfortable, she repeats. Pedro nods. Yeah, there's a pause, longer this time. The kind that doesn't feel empty. It feels like both of them are holding their ground, but also hearing each other. Sunny finally breaks it. I think that's something people don't see enough, disagreement without shutting down. Whoopi nods slowly, but her expression is still thoughtful. Maybe. Pedro leans back now, exhaling quietly. The conversation hasn't exploded, but it hasn't settled either. It's sitting right in that middle space, real, unresolved, and just tense enough that everyone in the room knows this isn't over yet. And the audience? They're completely locked in. The conversation doesn't reset. It just shifts again. You can feel it in the room. The way the audience has gone from reacting loudly to listening more carefully. The way the hosts are choosing their words more deliberately now. Pedro Pascal sits a little straighter, his expression calm but more serious than before. Across the table, Whoopi Goldberg keeps her eyes on him, her posture relaxed but her attention fully locked in. Joy Behar glances down at her cards, then back up. This is one of those moments where the producers are probably like, okay, where do we go from here? A few laughs ripple through the audience, easing the tension just slightly. Whoopi gives a small smile. We go where the conversation goes. Pedro nods. That's kind of the point, right? Sunny leans in. I want to take this one step further, because we've been talking about responsibility, platform, impact, but there's also something else happening here. She pauses briefly, looking at both of them. People are paying attention to how you disagree. That lands differently. The audience reacts with a quiet murmur. Pedro tilts his head slightly. What do you mean? Sonny continues. I mean, right now, this isn't shouting, it's not disrespectful, but it's still intense. And people don't always know how to handle that. Whoopi nods slowly. That's true. Pedro thinks for a moment. I guess we're not used to seeing disagreement without it turning into something bigger. Joy jumps in. Oh no, we're used to it. We just don't always like it. The audience laughs again. Alyssa adds, especially when it challenges something we already believe. Pedro nods. Yeah. Then he looks back at Whoopi. And I think that's part of what's happening here too. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. You think you're challenging me? Pedro doesn't smile this time. I think we're challenging each other. A louder reaction from the audience, some applause, some surprised, oh. Whoopi leans back slightly, crossing one leg over the other. All right, so let's be clear then. What exactly do you think you're challenging? Pedro pauses, choosing his words carefully again. I think I'm challenging the idea that having a platform means you should limit what you say to keep people comfortable. The audience reacts immediately, this time with stronger applause from one side. Whoopi doesn't react outwardly right away. She lets the reaction pass, then leans forward again. And I think, she says, her voice steady, I'm challenging the idea that having a platform means you should use it without fully understanding the weight of it. That gets an equally strong reaction from the other side of the audience. For a moment, it feels like the room is split right down the middle. Joy raises both hands slightly. Okay, now we've got teams forming. This is dangerous. The audience laughs, but the tension underneath is still there. Pedro nods slowly. I don't disagree with that. Whoopi looks at him, slightly surprised. You don't? Pedro shakes his head. No, I think the weight is real. There's a brief pause. But I also think, he continues, that waiting until you fully understand everything means you might never say anything at all. The audience reacts again, this time more mixed, more thoughtful. Whoopi studies him for a second. Or it means you take the time to get it right. Pedro responds quietly. And what if getting it right never really happens? That question hangs in the air. Sonny exhales softly. That's a big question. Alyssa nods. Because people expect certainty, but reality isn't always certain. Whoopi glances at Alyssa, then back at Pedro. Uncertainty is fine. But influence without clarity, that's where it gets tricky. Pedro leans forward again, his tone still controlled but more direct now. But clarity doesn't come from silence. A sharp reaction from the audience, this one louder than before. Joy looks between them. All right, I feel like we're circling something here. Pedro nods. We are. Whoopi adds, because it's not a simple answer. There's a brief moment where both of them almost agree. But it doesn't last long. Whoopi shifts slightly, her tone changing just a bit, still calm but more pointed. Let me ask you this. Have you ever said something publicly and then later thought, maybe I shouldn't have said that? Pedro doesn't hesitate. Yes. That immediate honesty gets a small wave of applause. Whoopi nods. Okay, so what did you do? Pedro shrugs lightly. I listened. I reflected. Sometimes I apologized. Sometimes I clarified. Whoopi leans in. And did that fix it? Pedro pauses. No, he says honestly. Not always. The audience reacts, some nodding, some murmuring. Whoopi gestures slightly with her hand. That's what I'm talking about. Once it's out there, you can't control where it goes. Pedro nods. I know. Then he adds, but that doesn't mean the answer is to never put anything out there. Whoopi responds immediately. No, but it means you think twice before you do. Pedro's expression tightens just slightly. I do think twice. Whoopi holds his gaze. Do you think everyone does? That question shifts the focus. Pedro leans back a little, considering it. No, probably not. Whoopi nods. Exactly. Sonny jumps in, trying to bridge the gap. So maybe the real issue isn't speaking out. It's how prepared people are when they do. Alyssa adds, and whether they're willing to deal with the consequences. Pedro nods. I agree with that. Then he looks back at Whoopi. But I also think the expectation of perfection can stop people from even trying. Whoopi responds calmly, or it can push them to do better. Pedro counters just as calmly, or it can make them afraid. The audience reacts again, split, engaged, fully invested now. Joy shakes her head, smiling. This is why I love this show. Nobody's backing down. A few cheers come from the audience. Whoopi glances briefly at Joy, then back at Pedro. It's not about backing down. Pedro nods. I know. It's about being responsible, Whoopi finishes. And being honest, Pedro adds. There's a pause. A real one. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. Because both points are sitting there, equally strong, equally unresolved. Sunny looks around the table. I think what people are seeing right now is something that doesn't happen enough. Two people standing firm in their beliefs without dismissing each other. Alyssa nods. And that's not easy to do. Whoopi leans back slightly, her tone softening just a fraction. No, it's not. Pedro exhales quietly. But it's necessary. The audience applauds, this time more unified than before. The tension hasn't disappeared. But it's changed. It's no longer sharp, it's steady. And just when it feels like the conversation might finally settle, Whoopi adds one more thing. Just remember, she says, looking directly at Pedro. When you speak, people listen, whether you intend them to or not. Pedro meets her gaze. I know, he says. And this time, there's no immediate response. No interruption. Just a quiet moment where both perspectives hang in the air, unresolved but understood. The kind of moment that only happens when the conversation is real. And everyone in the room knows. This isn't over yet. The moment hangs for a beat longer than usual. No one rushes to fill it. You can feel the weight of everything that's been said still sitting at the table. The audience, which had been reacting all throughout, is quieter now, watching closely, waiting to see how this actually ends. Whoopi Goldberg shifts slightly in her chair, her hands resting calmly on the table again. Across from her, Pedro Pascal leans back just a little, exhaling as if he's letting the intensity settle. Joy Behar is the first to break it. Well, nobody threw a mug, so I think we did all right, she says, half joking. The audience laughs, this time more freely. It's the kind of laugh that releases tension that's been building for several minutes. Pedro smiles, a real one this time. That's always a good sign. Whoopi lets out a small chuckle too, shaking her head slightly. Give it time. Another wave of laughter moves through the room. Sunny leans in, her tone softer now. I think what just happened is something people don't always get to see. A real disagreement that didn't turn into disrespect. Alyssa nods. Yeah, and that's rare right now. Whoopi glances at both of them, then back at Pedro. It shouldn't be rare. Pedro nods. No, it shouldn't. There's a sense now that the conversation isn't ending with a winner or a loser, but with something more grounded. Whoopi turns slightly toward Pedro. Look, I may not agree with everything you said. Pedro gives a small, understanding nod. I wouldn't expect you to. Whoopi continues, but I respect that you said it. The audience responds with a warm round of applause. Pedro looks at her, and there's a visible shift, less guarded, more open. I appreciate that. And I respect where you're coming from too, even if we see it differently. Whoopi gives a slight nod. That's what it's supposed to be. Joy leans back in her chair. Wow, look at us. Growth. The audience laughs again. Sunny smiles. Don't get used to it. That gets another laugh, easing things even more. But the impact of the conversation is still there. It hasn't disappeared. It's just settled into something quieter. Whoopi turns toward the camera, slipping back into host mode, but still carrying the tone of what just happened. This is why we sit at this table. Not to agree, but to talk things through. Applause fills the studio again. She gestures slightly toward Pedro. And we thank you for being willing to have that conversation here. Pedro nods. Thank you for having me. Really, Alyssa adds. And for not backing away from the tough questions. Pedro smiles lightly. I don't think you guys would have let me. Joy jumps in. Absolutely not. The audience laughs again. Whoopi wraps the segment. All right, Pedro Pascal, everybody. The applause is strong, loud, sustained. Pedro stands, shaking hands with each of the hosts. When he reaches Whoopi, there's a brief pause. They exchange a few quiet words off mic. Nothing dramatic, just a short, respectful moment. Then he walks off stage. The camera lingers on the table for a second longer than usual. The hosts exchange looks, not shocked, not uncomfortable, just aware that something real just happened. And then the show moves on. But outside the studio, that's where everything explodes. Within minutes, clips from The View start circulating online. Short, sharp moments, Whoopi saying intention doesn't erase impact, Pedro responding, I can't live in fear of it, begin trending across platforms. The reactions are immediate. Some viewers praise Pedro Pascal, calling him honest, grounded, and unafraid to speak his mind. Others side strongly with Whoopi Goldberg, saying she held the line on responsibility and asked the questions that needed to be asked. The divide is clear, but so is the engagement. Comment sections fill up fast. One user writes, "This is what real conversation looks like. No shouting, just truth." Another responds, "Whoopi was right. Having a platform means thinking before you speak." Clips get reposted, debated, analyzed. Even people who didn't watch the full episode start weighing in based on short segments. Media outlets pick it up too. Headlines begin to appear. Pedro Pascal and Whoopi Goldberg clash on live TV. Unexpected tension on The View sparks debate online. Backstage, things are much quieter. According to later reports, there was no argument once the cameras stopped. No confrontation. No lingering hostility. Pedro reportedly thanked the hosts again before leaving, even stopping briefly to speak with Whoopi one more time. This time completely off camera. It wasn't dramatic. It was just respectful. And that's what makes the on-air moment stand out even more. Because what people saw wasn't a feud. It was a real disagreement. Two perspectives colliding without either side backing down or shutting the other out. Back on the show's official page, the full segment starts gaining traction quickly. Views climb, comments pour in, and the debate continues long after the episode ends. Some viewers say it was one of the most engaging conversations they've seen on The View in a while. Others say it made them uncomfortable. But almost everyone agrees on one thing. It felt real. And in a space where so much can feel rehearsed or predictable, that kind of moment sticks. Whoopi returns in the next segment exactly as she always does. Calm, composed, moving forward like a professional who's been doing this for decades. Pedro moves on to his next appearance, his next project, his next interview. But that exchange, it follows both of them. Because it wasn't about a headline. It wasn't about a viral clip. It was about something bigger. How we talk to each other when we don't agree. And whether we're willing to stay in that conversation, even when it gets uncomfortable. So now it comes down to you. Where do you stand? Do you think Pedro Pascal was right to speak openly, regardless of the reaction? Or do you agree with Whoopi Goldberg that influence comes with a responsibility that can't be taken lightly? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories.